Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media.
لا تقل لي وحدي أو كيف السبيل.
Humanity sets the agenda.
There are an estimate of 153 million orphans worldwide. Change their lives by donating towards our Orphan Kind program. For 750 Rand per month, you can be the reason an orphan smiles. Go on, be Orphan Kind. Visit www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 11 00 573 to find out how you can help save these children's lives. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
With Delight's range of cooking oil, spreads, rice and maize meal, you'll be dishing out the most delightful dishes every day. Delight. Try it today. Delight is delightful.
From the townships of South Africa, the refugee camps in Syria, or orphanages in Yemen, the eyes of the needy speak volumes with just one glare. We know what it's like to be at ground zero, with food essentials, clothing and blankets, fresh water portal trucks, and even on-site navigators. We use every cent to better their tomorrow. Become part of our journey to bring relief to all. Go to www.ashrafulaid.org or call us on 011-809-8181. Ashraful Aid, under the auspices of Maulana Suhail Wadi.
It's a new beginning. It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening and welcome back. You are tuned into the special focus on Salam Media. My name is Zahid Javed and we are together right up until 9 p.m. this evening discussing one of the most important issues in Africa. Of course, one of the most important issues, though hardly discussed. It's something that has been pushed to the sidelines, and it regards the Sahrawi people in North Africa. It regards refugees. And these people are still waiting for an independent homeland. So we're going to be discussing this evening, and I'm proud to announce we've got a really powerful panelists this evening. We've got prominent activists who have been lobbying for independence for the Sahrawi people, and we're going to dive straight into it. So 45 years after fleeing the Moroccan forces who advanced through Western Sahara during the Western Sahara War in 1995, a significant number of Sahrawi refugees remain in the harsh desert conditions of refugee camps set up in the Tindouf Province of Algeria. Today, Western Sahara remains a disputed territory, with large parts of the territory being controlled by Morocco, while some parts of the country remain controlled by Polisario Front as the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Tonight, we try to get a better understanding of the conflict and unpack the importance of self-determination for Western Sahara and the Sahrawi people. This is the issue of Africa's last remaining colony unpacked. Let me introduce the guests for this evening. Firstly, we have His Excellency Ambassador Mohamed, who is the Ambassador of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic to South Africa. He joins us on the show now. Assalamu alaikum, Ambassador. Good evening and welcome to the show.
To your listeners. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good evening, brother, to you and to all the listeners.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. And we are also joined telephonically by Catherine Constantinides. She's an international human rights defender, social justice and climate change activist. Good evening to you, Catherine, and thank you so much for joining us.
With you again, thank you so much for the invitation to be on this program tonight.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. We will be joined a little later on in the show by Magdalene Moonsamy, a former member of parliament and lobbyist, as well as a human rights activist lawyer, and the deputy chairperson at the African Peer Review Mechanism. She'll join us to discuss this as well a little later on in the show, but we'll get straight into it to begin with, and we'll start with you, Your Excellency Ambassador Beisat. So let's start at the very beginning. To help us get a better understanding of what we're discussing. So what is the history behind the Sahrawi people's quest for self-determination?
To Thank you very much. To be very short, the Sahrawi people started struggling against liberation struggle against Spanish colonialism in the late 60s, when we kicked out the Spanish colonialism. We were surprised that they signed an illegal and shameful agreement with the Moroccans to divide our territory between them. That was the Madrid Secret Agreements of 14th November 75, where Spain and Morocco divided the territory. Spain ruled have a third of the phosphate, 33%, and shares in the fisheries, and Morocco will have half of the territory. And that was caused a war. We continued the war that we started against Spain, against the new invaders. The war continues in 91, when we reached a peace agreement with them, sponsored by United Nations, and that we do a ceasefire and we go for the referendum. When everything was ready for the referendum and we were about to organize the referendum, Morocco changed its position, saying they are no longer allowing any referendum to happen, and they are ready only to give a Bantustan, a sort of a Bantustan to the Sahrawi people, instead of their legitimate internationally recognized right of self-determination, which has been recognized by the International Court of The Hague, by United Nations, by non-aligned movement, by many countries in the world. And that's where we are now.
And the Polisario Front was formed to fight off Spanish colonialism, right? But why the Moroccan interest in ruling Western Sahara? Where did Morocco come into the picture? Where did their interest come from?
Morocco unfortunately have this bad habit. When Algeria got independence 62, they invaded Algeria 63, and they caused la guerre des sables, because they are claiming almost 1/4 of Algeria. When Mauritania got independence before that 60, Morocco claimed the whole of Mauritania, which is 3 times the territory of Morocco. And a conflict was with Mauritania for 10 years. Morocco refused to sign the charter of OAU because he refused to recognize the inherited frontiers at the independence, at the accession of independence. That's why Morocco was not signing the charter of OAU. So when Western Sahara got independence, Morocco kept its tradition of invading and claiming all his neighbors, unfortunately and sadly enough.
And this is where I'll bring you in, Catherine. So we've got a better understanding of where this long-standing conflict where it stems from, and we understand that the Sahrawi people have been fighting for independence even since since they were a Spanish colony. But now, why is it so important for the Sahrawi people that they achieve independence and their own homeland state?
The basis of this is very much the fact that we must not forget the fundamental human right of any person is the right to self-determination. So the people of Western Sahara have the right to choose who they are as a people, who they are ruled by, how they live and operate. This is a fundamental human right that has not been given to the people of Western Sahara. And in 1991, when the ceasefire agreement was entered into through the United Nations, the promise was that within 6 months of that, a referendum would be held for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. And for 30 years, that referendum has been aggravated. It has never seen the light of day. And it cannot be that in 30 years, we have not given these people the basic human right to choose for themselves. Self-determination is the fundamental human right that they have been denied. And that is the basis and premise of all of it. It cannot be that we can choose who will control the people of Western Sahara. They must choose for themselves. And we have to continue to fight for this fundamental human right, not just at conferences that are being held, but every single day, 365 days a year, we require political will in order to ensure that that referendum takes place.
Mhm. And interestingly, you mentioned the requirement of political will to achieve independence for the Sahrawi people, and we'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. But also, before we move on, I want to get your opinion on Morocco's interest. So, Ambassador Beisat mentioned how Morocco seems to have this tendency of invading its neighbors as soon as they achieved independence. He mentioned how that happened with Algeria as well, and it's similar to the situation in Western Sahara as well. But what exactly is Morocco's interest? That's what I'm curious to know. Why is Morocco so interested in invading its neighbors? Catherine?
Well, I think as His Excellency the Ambassador will also agree, first and foremost, we must understand that Western Sahara is very rich in natural resources. And so the plundering of these resources has been at the core of the colonial past of Western Sahara, as well as the exploitative manner in which Morocco has exploited and plundered these natural resources for its own economic gain. And the horrific thing is that they continue to do so even against international Court of Justice rulings, against the fact that they're not supposed to be trading with the natural resources of a country that they are occupying. And yet they continue to do so. They trade the agricultural produce, the tomatoes. There has been €1 billion trade and investment between Morocco and the EU. And all these kinds of things continue. The phosphates in Western Sahara are extremely valuable. And in order to be able to trade those phosphates, they have occupied the land and colonized the people and colonized the land. And we have to make sure that we understand that there is an economic gain here. Morocco has ensured that they have plundered that land so that when the referendum happens, the people of Western Sahara do not have the resources that they required to build their own economy. And in this trade that they have done illegally, trading be it the phosphates, the fisheries, the agricultural produce, they have excluded the people of Western Sahara in any of those economic projects or benefited that they have benefited for. Yes, the Kingdom of Morocco continues to benefit economically from the plundering of these natural resources, and it cannot continue. There has to be a boycott on these products and the resources, and we have to start to understand that only when we sanction Morocco and economically hold them from continuing what they're doing in Western Sahara, only then will they feel the pressure. But the world has not yet gone there. Why? Again, it goes to political will. Everyone is quite comfortable with keeping the status quo because everyone benefits from the colonization and the occupation of Western Sahara. Hello? Hello?
We can't hear you.
I can hear you, Ambassador, but I don't know if we're still online.
Yeah. But
so you're speaking to the
conversion
then, Catherine.
Apologies for that. So, Magdalene, Moonsamy, thank you so much for joining us. It's a really important discussion. Thank you so much for availing yourself this evening. Magdalene is a former member of parliament. She's a lobbyist. She's also a human rights activist and she's a human rights lawyer. She's also the deputy chairperson of the African Peer Review Mechanism. Thank you so much for joining us, Magdalene.
Assalamu alaikum, Zahir. How are you and how are the listeners? I hope everybody is well. Thank you for having me.
All good. All good. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. So we are in the middle of a really interesting and important conversation. We are discussing self-determination for the Sahrawi people, Western Sahara. You've been also participating in the activism to achieve self-determination for these people. And we were discussing, before you joined us, we were discussing the reason why Western Sahara 45 years later, after Spain relinquished control of Western Sahara. The Sahrawi people are still left without self-determination, and Morocco still largely colonized the place, the country. And we are also going to be discussing the Sahrawi refugees which have moved over to Algeria and their condition. We're going to be discussing that as well. But I also wanted to hear from you, Magdalene. So the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic was proclaimed by the Polisario Front on February the 27th, 1976. That's nearly 46 years ago in Birlehlu and in Western Sahara. Now, nearly 46 years later, the country has received only partial recognition and its very independence is disputed. So what do you think has been holding them back from achieving self-determination, Magdalene?
Thank you so much, Zahid. I think the first thing that we must consider is placing ourselves pragmatically in the shoes of the Sahrawi people. And when we make a reference, let me caution Catherine as well. We do not refer to people as these people and those people. That's the first level at which we find ourselves in a situation of separating individuals and the human race. The issue here is the issue that we faced in South Africa. It was an issue of apartheid. We knew what we experienced under colonization prior 1652. We understood what the dynamics were and the separatist nature. Somebody's making a noise in the background, Zahid. If you can just manage that for me, please. So what is important is to understand the process and the time that it has taken for us to find ourselves in a position where we were able to achieve this democracy, and the conditions under which we had to receive this democracy was based on us throwing stones in 1976 whilst we were faced with military armaments. Now, this is the situation of the Moroccans. The Moroccans have been involved in extensive genocide with the intention of wanting to occupy land, and land by its very nature provides power. And the 1884 Berlin Conference gives us a very clear picture of this. So whilst we are negotiating through United Nations resolutions, having MINURSO trying to assist and intervene in quelling the tensions, trying to do what needs to be done through the African Union, the EU, etc., we find ourselves in a paper war with 1.5 trillion US dollars of military arms in the faces of the Sahrawi people. Now, the other difficulty is the fact that Morocco does not acknowledge the Sahrawi people as a people, which takes me back to the point of not making such a reference as these people. These are our people. These are the people who stood with us through our struggle. And oppression is not unique. It's not unique to us as South Africans. It is not unique to Palestine. It is not unique to Kashmir. It's not unique to Tibet. It's not unique to Yemen. It's not unique in many parts of the oppressed world. Ours is to say that this continued 46 years later of partial, which isn't even what is wanted. We want our self-determination, a sovereign state, a state that is able to govern, not be under the control and the constant observation, as well as the interference of the Moroccan people. We find ourselves in a situation where the level of abuse against women and children by Moroccans, the genocide, the act of terrorism that Morocco has taken upon itself against the people of Western Sahara, are acts that we cannot stand by 46 years later and tolerate any further. The consciousness that we are raising with the people of South Africa is one, to appreciate the fact that the Sahrawi people have been actively involved in our struggle, and we must be actively involved in theirs. For them to understand the pure idea of freedom, where you have people who are in camps, who are under constant observation. The integration program of the United Nations allows children to sometimes see their parents after 30 years because land has been separated in an ad hoc fashion. Now, these are some of the concerns that come with colonization. And what we want to re-emphasize, because is that the last colony on the continent must be addressed by the African Union. The African Union and South African government have to make a very strong stance insofar as removing Morocco from the AU pending Morocco's sitting down at the table and resolving the issue of the referendum. The issue of a referendum has been in place. There has been special envoys, and one envoy in particular made an indication that there will never be a solution. Whoever tries to create a solution is fooling themselves. Now, that is not the kind of envoy that we need. And South Africa, through the AU, must be able to put pressure through its systems to ensure that there is a South African special envoy that is then sent, or the AU special envoy that is then sent to ensure that all of the issues that are outstanding in respect of the Sahrawi matter are resolved. And this, I think, is very important. One of the other issues is political prisoners. We find ourselves faced with political prisoners that are kept in the control of the Moroccans, who are beaten, women who are beaten, children who are beaten. And we refuse that in this day and age, political prisoners similar to those who have undergone exile, who have been through the structures of Umkhonto we Sizwe, like the Polisario, are now finding themselves needing to protect their people. The issue of political prisoners is another indictment on the part of Morocco. So I think that in very simple terms, what we need to have a South African society that stands behind fully each family member to teach their children that this is an indictment, that we've been through it, and we cannot allow one individual, two individuals. We must ensure that as a nation, we stand in solidarity with the Sahrawi people. And Morocco must relinquish its occupation in order to remain a member of the African Union. That is my basic position. Thank you, Zahid.
Mhm. Thank you so much for that rundown of your position. It's really insightful to hear your opinion as well, just as it is to hear from the other panelists as well. So there's quite a bit to discuss when it comes to the international community's responsibility towards Western Sahara, and especially South Africa's responsibility, the rest of Africa's responsibility. And we will get to that in due course of this discussion. But Ambassador Beisat, if I could come over to you, Catherine mentioned how Morocco's interest seems to stem from the plenty of natural resources that are available in the Western Sahara. And so, how has the Moroccan occupation affected Western Sahara's ability to flourish as a nation of its own?
Yes, Morocco occupation is mainly, most and foremost, is driven by the greed, like any colonial enterprise that have been seen in the history of humanity. Morocco, through his occupation to our country, they want to control 75% of the phosphate sold in the world. Morocco, through its occupation to our land, he wants to control the richest fisheries in the world, which is on the coasts of Western Sahara. Morocco also make use of the petrol, the gas, the iron, the gold, even the sand and the sun, which is through the renewable energy, which is selling to the Europeans. I think the primary goal that drove Morocco to occupy our territory is the greed, and he did an ill-advised calculations that the Sahrawis, being a small community, will never be able to stand to defend their rights. Actually, King Hassan, in a very ill-famous speech, he said that the occupation of Western Sahara will take Morocco a week. Today, on 27 February, we'll celebrate the 45th anniversary of the proclamation of Sahrawi Republic, which will mark 46 years of this war that is between the Sahrawis and Moroccans. Morocco is refusing, have signed with us, who is refusing to honor his own words that he signed with us on the peace agreements in 91. Then again, we signed 97 Houston agreements where we will organize the referendum. Then Morocco changes their heart about Houston agreements. Morocco gave a prestigious royal promise of his king in front of the Congress of OU when King Hassan pledged to organize the referendum. Morocco have signed the Constitutive Act where it stipulates clearly the respect of frontiers inherited at independence, but they didn't honor those promises. Morocco have endorsed and accepted and ratified the Constitutive Act of the African Union with no reservation. And that Constitutive Act of the African Union speaks explicitly and clearly about Sahrawi Republic as a founding member of the African Union. But unfortunately, this is the reputation of our neighbors who write anything and sign anything and promise anything, but they do quite another different thing, very different from they have signed and they have promised and they have ratified.
Catherine, you've been to Western Sahara as an activist. So perhaps you'd like to relate to us your experience of visiting that area, meeting the people. What are the conditions like in Western Sahara?
So for the past 8 years, I've worked extensively in the refugee camps. I haven't worked in Western Sahara itself, and unfortunately, I'm unable to access the occupied territory. I work with people from the occupied territory extensively, not only in the camps but outside in different parts of the world where we work together. And the conditions in the refugee camps are very different to those in the occupied territory. In the refugee camps, the Sahrawi people are very safe, in the sense that, they're not living under an occupation. However, they live with less than nothing. The conditions of the refugee camps are the temporary refugee camp setup that was set up in 1975. The temporary refugee camp that was set up was a short-term solution to the migration and movement of the Sahrawi people at the time. But they are still now, so many years later, still stuck in the refugee camps because they are waiting on this promise of a referendum that has not happened. You then look at the people in the occupied territory who live very differently under immense strain and stress every single day because the people in the occupied territory are brutally attacked and violently attacked every single day. I think of Sultana Kaya, who over the weekend was brutally attacked by the Moroccan armed forces, who forced themselves into her house. She has been under house arrest, and yet they still brutally attacked her in such a vile manner. So the people in the occupied territories are living under very harsh, brutal conditions, and they're living under occupation, and so they're not allowed the freedom to live and be who they are. Whereas in the refugee camps, you find a very different situation where you have Sahrawi people who are able to be Sahrawi, who can openly and proudly live their culture, their traditions, and not have to worry that they're going to be beaten. But the Sahrawis in the occupied territory live under very different conditions because they're not prepared to say that they are not Sahrawi. They're not prepared to not fly their flag. They're not prepared to not be vocal about who they are. And because they are proud to still be who they are, they find themselves under immense oppression on a daily basis, no matter who they are, young or old, male or female, the Moroccan regime does not care and does not, does not worry if a child is only 9 years old. They will still brutally attack even children. There was a girl not so long ago, in fact, just a few weeks back, and after the November 13th entry back into war, a young girl went to school and she had a flag on the apron of her school dress, and she was in fact arrested. And this was a child, a school-going child, and she was arrested. What she faced when she went into the police authorities' custody is unthinkable. And the kind of format that she has now had to face is something that we should not be allowing to take place in the year 2020 or 2021, where we should be far beyond the means of allowing these terrible atrocities to take place.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the initial refugees who fled the Western Sahara War and moved over to Algeria, to the refugee camps that exist today in Tindouf, these people have now, there's an entire new generation which is growing up in the refugee camps. Sahrawi people who've never seen their homeland of Western Sahara as well. So how are they reacting? Are they hopeful of returning to Western Sahara and eventually achieving independence, Catherine?
I think that one has to understand that the hope and the dream and the promise of returning to their homeland has been something that younger generations have been promised for all of their life. Younger generations that have never seen the occupied territories, but have only heard about the occupied territories. There is a groundswell of young people that have said enough is enough. There is, in fact, a groundswell of young people who are prepared to be a part of this liberation war and to give their life for the freedom of their people. And that is the true spirit of the Sahrawi people. They are freedom fighters. They are absolutely determined by all means to ensure that every single day they dream of that freedom that should be theirs and should be their children's freedom. But there is a certain frustration and anger, as you can understand, because the promise of freedom and the promise of returning home has only been but a dream. And the lack of political will and feeling that lack of international solidarity is something that's very difficult to cope with in and amongst the physical situation that you find yourself in when you're in a refugee camp. And for those older people in the refugee camp who arrived there in 1975, their lives have almost been left in 1975. They're not living in built-up cities. They're not living in a modern society. They are living under extreme circumstances where there are climatic conditions that they have to battle through. There are restraints on access to so many things. So they live on this promise and this dream of the fact that they will go home. And young people have said enough is enough. They're prepared to give their life in this liberation war to ensure the freedom of their people.
Yes, indeed. It is really, it's heartwarming to see that the spirit still lives on. And Ambassador, if we could just discuss Algeria's role in resolving this dispute. So Algeria is a neighboring country, and Algeria is housing the refugees who fled the Western Sahara War. They are residing in refugee camps in Algeria. What sort of role does Algeria have to play in resolving the dispute?
Algeria is a neighboring country like Mauritania. We have two neighboring countries. The third one is Morocco. Our two neighbors, Mauritania and Algeria, have recognized the Sahrawi Republic, and they are very supportive to the struggle of the Sahrawi people. While the third neighbor, who is Morocco, is invading us and throwing and doing everything to destabilize the region. I think the role of the neighboring country is well established by the resolution of the United Nations. They are always invited to the rounds of negotiations between us and Morocco. But the propaganda of Morocco reminds me of propaganda of apartheid, where they were saying does not exist the struggle of South Africa, ANC and the PAC does exist. This is only a problem created by Zimbabwe and Mozambique and Angola. And he goes to attack those countries out of his denial of the existence of the liberation movements of the representing the South African people. This is very old colonial garbages that Morocco keep recycling and presenting to the world. Why, in his denial of the existence of the Sahrawis and their legitimate representative as Polisario Front, who is recognized by United Nations, he is trying to blame Algeria and Mauritania and sometimes Spain, that they are the source of the problem. The source of the problem is the occupation of Morocco of the land of the Sahrawis. The source of the conflict is Moroccan refusal to implement the international legality. The source of the problem that Moroccan non-compliance of international law and non-respect of written and signed and endorsed peace plans that have been accepted by him firsthand.
Mhm. And if I could just move on to Maggie now, Magdalene Moonsamy. So the international community, of course, does have an important role to play when it comes to holding Morocco accountable for their actions. We've highlighted a few of these actions committed by Morocco, the defiance of international law. Catherine has also spoken extensively about that. So where does the international community stand, Magdalene, in terms of holding Morocco accountable for their actions? Magdalene, if you could just unmute your mic, please.
Okay. Does Morocco have over the international community? What is its influence? What is the nature of its propaganda? And what is it using? And how is it negotiating its power through the occupation of the Western Sahara? Because this is now its opportunity to ensure that its natural resources, its resources of every other form, that being land and as identified by His Excellency, are the things that are needed by the European. Now, let me give you an example. Morocco commits theft in broad daylight without any form of excuse or remission for its actions. And we find a ship on the shores of Port Elizabeth of resources, phosphate that comes from the Western Sahara. We then have to attach the goods and the cargo. The international community has a right to play in so far as exercising the legalities that have been imposed and the legalities that must be imposed without fear, without favor. The international community has an obligation to provide solidarity against the levels of genocide and inequality and disrespect for international law by Morocco. The international community has an obligation to take the king to the International Criminal Court, to hold the king accountable, because it is a monarchy. That you will find that even the Moroccans themselves would rather identify themselves as Sahrawi people than as Moroccan, because the rate of unemployment in Morocco is almost 38%. Young people in Morocco want to protest and want to contest the governance and the discrepancies that exist in the monarchy, but they are muzzled. It is not only the international community that is concerned about the state of Morocco and its ability to use the resources, its acts of terror, its acts of violence in order to create an intimidation to the international community that they are in control over the Western Sahara. Now, there's something that I must say. The Sahrawi people are frustrated, but the Sahrawi people have never lost hope. They continue to maintain, they have not retreated. They are unified. They are in solidarity as a nation, as a people. And what the obligation of the international community must be to look at the issue of Western Sahara, its people, its ability to survive and to persist and persevere under those conditions as an example to the world. The Sahrawi people are an example to the world of what democracy is, of what the understanding and appreciation of respect for human rights are, as they respect their people and their women. You won't find prisons occupied in the Western Sahara, but you will find political prisoners of Sahrawi people in Morocco for reasons that are not provided. There was a point that CNN went in to the occupied territory to try and establish what was really going on. Morocco then requested the emergent, there were protests at the time, His Excellency will remember, it was about 2 or 3 years ago. The Morocco instructed the international community to remove CNN because it did not want its propaganda machinery to be tainted by international media. So the international community has a responsibility to create awareness against the propaganda of Morocco, to show the reality that exists on the ground and that of the Sahrawi people.
And Catherine, of course, we've seen how the international community has responded, and as Magdalene highlighted, there seems to be there's the African Union that has their responsibility, the international community that has its responsibility on a larger scale, on a broader scale, and the African Union has accepted Western Sahara into the African Union. Similarly, the African Union has also accepted Morocco into the African Union without terms, however. Do you think the African Union has been fair in this whole process? Have they met their obligations, Catherine?
I would say they absolutely have not met their obligations. It cannot be that a founding member of the original OAU and now the AU is sitting with a country that is still under colonization and is being colonized by a fellow African country, a brother country. It's not a country on the other end of the continent or somewhere else. It is a neighboring country that is occupying and colonizing a fellow country. I think that one has to relook at the preamble of the Constitution of the African Union to just understand that Morocco re-entering the African Union without terms and conditions is something that should never, ever have taken place. It should never have happened. This was a key moment and opportunity for the African Union to truly stand on its feet and make a bold statement with terms and conditions that allowed for the right kinds of conversation, for the right parties to be brought around a table, managed by the African Union themselves, to do something that was tangible and that was meaningful and impactful in order for a solution to come to the fore. And we have lost that opportunity. I think that the African Union is not being driven by the agenda of what is required of Africa. And I think we have to relook. We could speak all night just on this specific issue. But in answer to your question, absolutely not. We have failed the people of Western Sahara, and we continue to fail them by having conferences where we make grand and bold statements, but no action is taken. How is it that still the people of Western Sahara are without a referendum, without their freedom, and without justice having been served to them so long after this has been an issue and part of the agenda for so many years? And then we allow Morocco back into the African Union without these terms and conditions of any kind, and no reference to a solution that needs to come to the fore on the issue of Western Sahara. It is absolutely appalling, and it is really telling of a greater story as to where the agenda lies when it comes to the AU.
And we've got to begin wrapping up this discussion with just about 13 minutes remaining of this discussion. And we're going to now move on to, as recently as December last year, there was the truce was broken and conflict did arise once again between Morocco and Western Sahara. Ambassador Beisat, where do you see this dispute evolving? How do you see it evolving in time to come?
The return of the hostilities was caused by Morocco when he sent his army to occupy more land of the Sahrawis and to attack the Sahrawi civilians who are
Ambassador Beisat? We seem to be having difficulty connecting with Ambassador Beisat at the moment, and we'll try to rectify that network connection, and we hope that Ambassador can join us soon once again. But if we could move that over to you, Magdalene, the very same question. Where do you see this conflict, this dispute? Where do you see it going over the course of the next few years? How do you see it evolving, Magdalene? Magdalene, your mic once again, please.
Okay. For me, I think that we are coming to a conclusion. We are finding our way in the international community. We are finding our way in terms of ensuring that there's going to be an envoy and that there's going to be pressure on the AU. We are going to continue the pressure campaigns. We are going to continue lobbying. We are going to continue advocacy as international human rights activists. We are going to continue ensuring. I want to relate an incident of what happened in Kashmir. If you remember the situation in Kashmir, and we came together, Pakistani and all our people together as a solidarity campaign, and we ensured that we were able to alleviate and negotiate some of the acts of violence against the people of Kashmir. Now that was done in a very short space of time. And what is really important, even though it continues, those that are continuing without any kind of other influences. However, the sooner we become one people, the sooner we teach our children, the sooner we teach our neighbors and our communities, the sooner we make a noise and apply pressure from all corners of the world, we are getting to a point where Morocco no longer has excuses. If the AU can act on Article 14 and ensure that all states that have ratified the Constitutive Act of the African Union and respect the sovereignty of states as the Western Sahara has been acknowledged as a sovereign state. The issue is simply ensuring. The problem will remain with Morocco. Morocco is afraid. It's afraid of losing the referendum. This we had an experience many years ago in East Timor, and surprisingly, the referendum was a success. I believe, Zahid, and we must believe, and we must not just believe, but we must act on our belief that the sooner than the 45, 46 years past, we will receive our freedom as a Sahrawi people. Both yourself, both the listeners, and all of those who have got any interest and understanding of the South African vision. We never believed that there would come a time when we would have democracy. Our democracy may be questionable, but we have freedom
and we have a Bill of Rights. We have protection. We never believed it at some point, but we achieved it through international pressure, through sanctions. We have to apply sanctions as a people against those who are imposing and stealing from the shores and the sands of the Western Sahara. And when we do that, that will then cause international attention like it did for South Africa, where we thought we'd never have democracy. We have achieved it. And this is the same belief that I share for the Sahrawi people. I do believe that there's so much more that Salam Media must do and can do in order to engage. We've tried on numerous occasions to engage with the Moroccan counterparts in South Africa, to listen to their view and just to start and open a try and say, look, we're not comfortable with you being here. However, tell us, what is your reasoning for this oppression? It's not simply just the theft. It's not simply just the acts of genocide, terrorism, violence, political prisoners, theft of natural resources. It is also the fact that oppression, it remains, it's a word that the world has been moving away from for such a long period of time. So it is so critical, Zahid, that we continue in a very dedicated manner to ensure that we are able to achieve this goal. And in my view, I am an absolute optimist that just as there are changes that will come in Palestine, there are changes that will come all over the world, the change for the Sahrawi people is coming soon.
Thank you so much for that, and we do hope to keep the optimism alive, and we hope that change does occur. Catherine, do you think the African Union, how likely do you think they are going to be in holding Morocco accountable? Are they going to do it by themselves, or are they going to wait until we reach a situation where there's way too much scrutiny on the African Union and they have no choice but to act? Catherine, please, just as briefly as possible so that we can begin wrapping up.
I didn't hear the last thing you've just said, sorry?
What I was saying is that we were speaking about the African Union, the international community's obligation. So my question was, do you think the African Union, how likely do you think they are to actually take action now? Do you think they're going to take action out of their own, seeing that this is the right thing to do, this is what needs to be done, we need to take action against Morocco, or are they going to wait for a time when we reach to the point where there's way too much scrutiny on the African Union and where they are in a position that they are forced to then take action against Morocco?
I think we're in a place where we need all hands on deck. We require that not only the African Union acts swiftly and quickly in order to gain the lost ground of the time that has passed already. And I hope that it's not a case of them only reacting because there are many other role players that we're required to also be all hands on deck. For example, the United Nations need to play a more vocal role and a more stern, they really need to do something more than just make statements. For example, when November 13th happened, we had a statement coming out from Antonio Guterres' office as the Secretary General of the UN. That is not enough. We really need actions that have solutions, that are driven to ensuring that a solution comes to the fore. And I think that the African Union has been pressured a great deal. We need to continue that pressure. We need to continue that international solidarity. The fellow panelists, all the statements she has made, very, very clear, very important to also look at how have other models around the world worked, other people under oppressive regimes. We need to really have all hands on deck. We need to continue pressuring both the African Union as well as the United Nations. And we need to continue making sure that, as I said earlier, that the issue of Western Sahara is not something that is spoken about only when it reaches the agenda on the African Union or the UN's roll call. It has to be something we're talking about every single day. We need to make the issue of Western Sahara a priority, and we need to ensure that solutions come bearing fruit, that they have impact, and that we allow that the forgotten people return home in our lifetimes. It has to be that the people of Western Sahara can no longer be forgotten and just shoved into the dark corners of both the United Nations and African Union, where they're not spoken about because this is such a politically sensitive issue, but it's something that we all galvanize behind and say there's an injustice here, and we need to make sure that we bring everyone to the table and we ensure we sort it out.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that. The time is just gone 58 minutes past 8 p.m. Central African time. We're going to have to leave it there. But just before we wrap up, I want to give each one of the panelists an opportunity to share their closing remarks. We'll start with Ambassador Beisat, and we'll move over to Magdalene, Moonsamy, and finally Catherine.
Thank you very much, Zahid. Replying to your question, the end of the conflict will be like the end of every conflict that have preceded it. It will be like the end of South African apartheid colonialism. It will be like how it ended in Namibia, how it ended in Zimbabwe, how it ended in Mozambique, how it ended in everywhere where there have been colonialism and oppression and military occupation. Morocco will leave Western Sahara. The Sahrawis and their allies and their friends in the world, they will intensify the fight, will intensify the struggle, and we shall overcome, like the South African used to say, and no one has believed them. But here it happened. It happened in our neighbors in Algeria. It happened in Mauritania. It happened in Morocco itself. And it will happen again in Western Sahara. That's the course of the history, and that's the course of the logic of the things. And I want to close with thanking remark for you, Zahid, for Salam Media, for the distinguished panelists, Constantinides and Mademoiselle Moonsamy, for their presence and for their views. I thank you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador Beisat. Magdalene, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts, Zahid. One is that the Sahrawi people are a peace-loving people. They are a peaceful people. And we cannot allow what is understood to be political peace, to be human peace and humanity's understanding of peace. There has been absolutely no commitment from the side of the Moroccan people to demonstrate peace and a recognition of human rights, human existence. We need to ensure that our responsibility is to remain committed to this peaceful, to protect the peaceful character, nature, and culture of the Sahrawi people, but also to continue to raise the flag of the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, very high, wherever we go and however we do it. We remain in solidarity. We thank Salam Media for allowing us this opportunity, Zahid. We thank His Excellency, Catherine, and you must go to the camp, Zahid.
Hopefully I will. I do
Yes.
intend on one day, visiting
And
camps.
we are officially
but
invited.
hopefully there will be no camps to go to, and we'll have a proper community.
Officially.
Thank you so much,
You must
Ambassador.
go once the borders are open, Zahid.
Definitely, I'd love to go. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ambassador.
Would love to. I think I'm going to make that decision on behalf of myself and make sure it happens. That's going to
All
be
right,
a deal.
indeed,
And you
let's wait.
The occupied and unoccupied territories equally, because it is the Sahrawi people that make it beautiful, not the Moroccans. And the occupied territories are simply occupied by Moroccan mentality. It is not in our mentality as Sahrawi people that we are occupied. Our spirit and not our ideas or our culture. It is in the mind of the Moroccans. So that propaganda of Moroccans must come to an end. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. We are taking you to the camp, Zahid.
Definitely. I cannot wait to visit the
look
camps
nervous.
indeed
Don't
one day.
look nervous. Don't look nervous.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
And you know, you also mentioned raising the flag, raising the flag of the Sahrawi people, and it's rather disappointing that something I noticed earlier on when I was doing my research. In WhatsApp, have you noticed under the flag section of the emojis, there's no Sahrawi flag, and it's really disappointing. But that's just a side note from me, and let's give Catherine a quick opportunity to wrap up and share her final thoughts. Catherine.
Thank you so much again to Salam Media and to yourself, Zahid. Thank you very much for the opportunity to highlight the issue of Western Sahara. Let us continue to do all that we can for our Sahrawi brothers and sisters. I continue to, to drive their agenda with them, because the Sahrawi people are our people, and we continue to stand in the sand with them. We continue to ensure that we give voice and highlight the injustices taking place on a daily basis across our social media platforms. To those who are listening to us and are on social media, you can follow me at Change Agent SA on Twitter or Instagram, and you're welcome to find daily updates on the issues taking place on the ground in both the occupied territories as well as the refugee camps. And let us ensure we do all that we can to highlight this injustice. And I also hope, Zahid, like you said, I hope that when borders open, there's no need for you to go to any refugee camps, because the Sahrawi people are given the right to self-determination and will rightfully return home. And there in Western Sahara, we will be together celebrating not only a freedom, but looking back at a long, long history and ensuring that we never allow the stories of the freedom fighters of our Sahrawi people to be forgotten. We will continue to tell the stories of the bravery, their courage, and their absolutely incredible sense of humanity with the world. They are our people, and will continue to fight until the day freedom and justice is theirs.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for that. So that's where we're going to have to leave it this evening, and a really important discussion around self-determination and the Sahrawi people. Thank you so much to each one of the panelists for your time and your contribution. His Excellency Mohamed Beisat, Ambassador of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic to South Africa. Catherine Constantinides, apologies for that, international human rights defender, social justice and climate change activist. Magdalene Moonsamy, a former member of parliament and a lobbyist, as well as a human rights activist, lawyer, and the deputy chairperson of the African Peer Review Mechanism. Thank you so much to each one of you for your time this evening.
Jazakallah.
All right, thank you so much for that. And that's where we're going to have to leave it this evening. Thanks to the listeners as well for tuning in. Remember to keep the conversation going off air as well. You can tweet and tag @Salam Media. Don't forget to also, you could also leave your comments below the broadcasts on Facebook and YouTube as well. We keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for your time. We do hope to do this again next week, same time, same place. Please do stay tuned.